Welcome to another episode of the On the Water podcast.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things about Jimmy is when you hit him with a zinger and there's that 2 or 3 second delay and he turns his head like a golden retriever and kind of looks at you and he's like, "Oh, wait a minute, that was mean."
I was like, "Hey, Mom, I think I got a couple hours. I just need 20 minutes." She's like, "She just get to the goddamn hospital with your wife and have your baby." So I did that.
The Miami boat show.
I was a spectator for this whole thing. But I know it's probably kind of been reverse engineered and
I don't need any politician spin doctor. Just tell me what happened. Welcome to another episode of the On the Water podcast. Beautiful.
Let's go.
Welcome to another episode of the On the Water podcast. Actually, this is the 50th episode of the On the Water podcast, and that is 50 is a big number for striped bass fishermen. So we wanted to do this just in house with Anthony Cheech and Kevin Blinkoff, and of course I'm Jimmy Fee. And Kevin, why is 50 a big number to striped bass fishermen?
50 is just the classic goal for all striped bass fishermen, to get that 50 pounder or 50 incher. I do feel like this was kind of set up just as a way for you to brag because you've caught 50s.
I think that is exactly why he invited you and I here,
Yeah.
so that he could just humble brag the entire podcast.
I could have invited anybody from the office in here because I'm the only one in this office that's caught a 50-pound striped bass.
Nailed it.
But that is not why I did this. But we could talk about why 50-pound striped bass is the milestone. I know there's a lot of fishing milestones out there, and they're all perfectly round numbers. So, I mean, that's how you arrive at it. A lot of them are double digits. So for flounder, for fluke, it's a double-digit fluke. For tog, double-digit. Largemouth bass, the big one is 10 pounds.
It's really the upper 25 percentile of that fish's, range, I feel like.
I mean, I want to say it's probably about 50% is as large as they grow. So 50% of, the world record fluke is 22 pounds. World record tog is closer to 30, but it's in the 20s. So a double-digit tog at 10 pounds is halfway to the maximum size.
I guess that doesn't
roughly
really hold true because, some people, and everybody has different, thresholds for what a true trophy is. Like a lot of people, if I catch a 5-pound largemouth, that works for me. But others are like, I only care. I want to catch a 7 or an 8. You know what I mean?
But there are those widely accepted ones. And
Yeah.
one of those for striped bass is 50 pounds. And I think a lot of that goes back to the old Schaefer Cup tournament, which was the Striper Cup. The original format of the Striper Cup was modeled after the Schaefer Cup. That was Schaefer was a beer company in the 1960s and 70s, probably long before that. But as part of their promotional materials, they had this Schaefer Cup, which was a tournament where they encouraged fishermen to form teams, and then the teams with the top 10 heaviest fish weighed in won the Schaefer Cup each year. And one of their sponsors was the Ashaway Line Company that said if you caught a striped bass over 50 pounds, you joined the Nifty 50 Club. So I think that kind of established the fact that the 50-pound people who've caught 50-pounders for striped bass as being part of a club. You still see that reference today.
I thought it was 48 pounds, but no, 50 has been that kind of magic number for striped bass. Is it shifting to 50 inches now? Because it's...
I think more folks now are measuring fish in inches and thinking striped bass wise. They look at pounds versus inches because it's a lot easier to measure a fish versus weigh it and release it healthy. Hanging a fish on a scale is pretty discouraged at this point, whether you do it at a tackle shop or if you're doing it on a boat with a lip gripper. So I think inches is the new pounds.
Yes and no. I mean, you really don't. It's true. Kevin's right. People now, you want to get
conscious.
Exactly. You can't keep a 50-pound striped bass anymore. The regulations don't allow it. The heaviest striped bass you can keep is probably in the 10 to 12-pound range. So there's really no reason to weigh a big fish unless you're going to do it in a way, maybe you weigh the net with the fish in it so the fish stays horizontal. It's pretty well established that hanging a big heavy fish by its lower lip just to weigh it is not the best for that fish.
Yeah. If I was to weigh a striped bass, it would definitely be in the net horizontal. I feel like that's the responsible way to do it. But at the end of the day, there's really no purpose of taking them out of the water anymore. So it's just kind of want to keep them in the water and let them go.
And 50 inches, to me, it's not a 1-for-1, 50 inches to 50 pounds. striped bass have such a wide range of weights per length. I used to work at a tackle shop. I remember we weighed in a 50-inch striped bass one year that we caught in July. This was in Ocean City, New Jersey. 50-inch striped bass came in and weighed 28 pounds.
It was a racer.
It was an absolute racer. And you see 48-inch fish that weigh 50 pounds. Now, which of those would you rather catch?
Yeah. The 48-incher that weighs 50 pounds.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the heavier fish, because I think that the idea is that if it's heavier, maybe it's older, or maybe it's stronger. I don't know. It's we kind of put we put
weight
these,
over inches always. It's just the way it, like people that brag about their fish in inches. Like those are the ones we used to make fun of. Like at the breakfast joint or something. My dad'd be like, yeah, that guy he counts his inches.
That was always a way to throw shade at somebody. If they're like, oh yeah, I caught a 32. You go pounds or inches. And you only asked that if you knew the answer was going to be inches. But that was kind of an old school mentality, though. And I think that comes from weighing in your fish at the tackle shop, the commercial fishing roots of striper fishing. So many people back in the day would supplement their incomes with rod and reel commercial fishing, some of the real serious striped bass anglers. So we are shifting toward kind of a gentler.
And when you're keeping striped bass as food or any fish for food, you care about how much it weighs, the pound of how many pounds of meat do you have versus the length of a fish.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of that is where it comes from as well.
Yeah, Kevin, one of your lines you would always say is, if we really wanted to know the value of these fish, we would only weigh their fillets. So he said the amount of meat, the edible meat you could get off a fish is the true value of that actual catch.
Yeah, that was an idea I had one point for a tournament. You keep fish, and it also tested your fillet skills. So you would actually weigh in the fillets that you had to cut off the fish. And so now and part of that is because fish change weight so much throughout just the course of a year. So a striped bass in the springtime post-spawn is just dropped its eggs. Big female striped bass is going to be a much lighter fish than it is going to be later in the year right before it spawns. So much of the weight of a fish is even just what's in its stomach. A striped bass could go from 44 pounds to 50 pounds with 6 pounds of bunker in its stomach.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool concept. I kind of see a on the water fillet and release sea bass tournament on the horizon this spring.
Well, can we keep them and eat them at least?
Of course, they're the best eating fish going.
Well, then how about fillet and keep? But anyhow, I would love to do that.
What are you going to do with the racks? What are you going to do with the racks, Jim? You're just going to hang on to them and let them,
I think that's a great idea for a tournament because, one, test your fishing prowess and your fish cutting prowess, and that's something where I know you're very high on yourself on how you cut fish.
Who said that? That's only because you look at mine and go, oh, I got to be better.
What about just a cheek competition? Black sea bass cheeks. So then you have to catch a big one. You have to cut the cheeks out, and now we're just competing on the weight of the cheeks.
Now you're speaking my language. The cheeks. I don't know if you know this, but the cheeks are the best cut of meat off any fish that has cheeks. Now even tuna have cheeks, but I've never cut the cheeks out of a tuna. I tried. Quantum is back and saltier than ever with the new Benchmark and Strive saltwater spinning reels. Last season, I used the Benchmark in the surf from Cape Cod to New Jersey, catching bass and blues on my 6000 model and albies and fluke on my 2500 model. The seal lock protection and IPX6 water resistance rating kept the reel performing flawlessly through every splash, spray, and accidental dunking. The best-in-class carbon fiber drag stayed smooth and put the boots to the fish. I cannot wait to break these reels back out when the stripers return in the spring. Also available is the new Quantum Myth High Modulus Carbon Fiber Rods. Built with Sea Guide corrosion-resistant guides for friction-free line flow and premium cork handles, these inshore rods pair perfectly with the Benchmark and Strive reels. To learn more about Quantum's triumphant return to the saltwater scene, visit quantum.com. Quantum, tested beyond limits.
So the 50th episode, this was kind of a wild ride of how we even got to having a podcast, right? It just kind of came out of, thin air. It was the three of us were like, let's try to find a way to launch a podcast. And, we found the partners to make it happen. And we just kind of jumped into this thing. And I think the thing that kind of surprised me the most is how quickly it got to hearing feedback. Because we've started plenty of initiatives along the way. And I mean, you've been with the company for how long, Jim?
Since 2008.
2006.
Yeah, so 2010 for me. So we've been a part of a lot of pivots and new launches that the company has pulled off, and this was one of the quickest to kind of find its find a sweet spot. Like the audience let us know that they were liking what we were putting out, and it's been a pretty awesome run. But at the same time, if you knew it from the inside out, like we do, it was like we just kind of shot from the hip.
Yeah, what's been fun about podcasting is when we first started and we're putting these together, you have this feeling like you're just talking to each other. You don't really feel like anybody's out there listening. And all of a sudden we, made a few episodes, and you go out in public. Like, for example, this week we're looking forward to the Rhode Island Saltwater Angling Show is this weekend.
Sure.
And all of a sudden, you go to these winter shows and people are coming up and they're mentioning things you said in the podcast. Half the time they're talking about things that I have no recollection of saying.
Yeah, of course.
And a lot of times it's just, you hear back from these people and realize, oh, wow, folks are listening. It still feels sitting here right now like this is just the three of us sitting around at the office just talking about whatever. It's pretty cool that our audience is out there, that they're listening to this podcast and give us feedback, tell us what they like and what they don't like. We really appreciate it.
I mean, that's what I love about listening to podcasts, too, is you do feel like you're at the table. You feel like you have a seat at the table. Whether I'm listening to, the Millhouse podcast or Joe Cermelli's Cut and Retie podcast, whether you're in there or not, you feel like you're there sitting, kind of listening to the guys. You're part of the conversation, especially when it's something you're so passionate about, like fishing. And it's been great to hear from everybody about the On the Water podcast. So that's we really appreciate everybody who's been listening to it.
And we've had some awesome shows, great guests, a lot of really good conversations. Cheech, any jump to the front of your mind of some of your favorite shows and podcasts we've done over the last 50?
I think the one that had me speechless, which is hard to do, was my buddy Fronius' uncle, Eric DeHedeville. Like, just having a normal conversation, kind of somebody that has been around this town and seen, a version of Falmouth way beyond me ever experienced the Cape even, and to kind of get that first person perspective, but then to come out of left field and basically tell a story about how he's on a pulpit, his brother's up in a spotter plane, and the pulpit snaps off the boat and drags him to the depths, and I think they were in like 500 plus feet of water. And I've known his nephew. He's one of the first Falmouth kids that I met when I started dating my now wife. So to never hear that story and be completely caught off guard, I was like, is he messing with me right now? I'm like, oh no, he's dead serious. So I think that was kind of like one of those situations where it just caught me completely off guard. And I found myself more of a spectator than an interviewer in that podcast. I thought that was pretty cool. How about you, Jimmy? You got any?
I always love talking to the scientists. I've loved talking to every guest we've had, but I especially like when we can get a marine biologist or a fisheries manager in here and hear, take a peek behind the curtain how the other. I love
Good
getting
question,
the fishing
Jimmy.
perspective. Yeah, so that I was getting there. I always get that's the joke is like we'll be in these podcasts and Kevin will ask an actual good question and the scientist will just answer it, and I'll ask a question and they'll treat me like a kindergartner and they'll be like, "Good question. Well, bluefin are called bluefin because their fins are blue. Like any other questions, Kevin." So I get treated like the little dumb kid, but it is. You have these pressing questions, and a lot of times scientists have an answer for it that maybe you hadn't thought about. Jeff Kneebone, for example, talking about yellowfin tuna migrations. The yellowfin tuna we catch in the canyons, some of them they've tagged here, recaptured off Africa. So that type of stuff where, and you guys had a great one with Dr. Walt Collette.
Yeah, that was
talking
a good
about
one.
bluefin tuna DNA and the DNA mapping that he's been doing.
Another thing I love about doing the podcast is what it ends up leading to. Like, there's been so many instances where we'll have somebody in who's like kind of an extension of the On the Water family. Diorio, Robbie Taylor, Brian Coombs. Like, I could name a ton of people that have been on it. Terry Nugent, the last one, where I don't know about you guys, but when I find myself in those ones, the whole time I'm thinking like, have I ever like actually really fished with this person other than just like, a quick mission before a trade show or or the day of the podcast or something where it's typically like freshwater fishing or low hanging fruit. And I found myself basically wondering about that and being like, no, I haven't. I'm booking a trip with him. And we wrap up the podcast, and the next thing you know, it's like, dude, get me a date. And like the best kind of trips have come out of those, that the best bass fishing in my life came from that kind of a scenario with Diorio. And then Robbie Taylor, it ended up a buddy of mine watched the podcast, watched one of the episodes, and was like, I want to book a tuna trip with him. And next thing you know, 40-something tuna later, we're tonguing them on Taylor's boat. They're real easy. So it's like things like that have always seemed to come out of the podcast, and sometimes it comes from the guest's perspective, which is pretty cool. You guys haven't heard this one yet. It's gonna come after this podcast, but we have Teddy Bruschi coming up in a couple episodes, and next thing you know, that led to, well, I don't want to steal the thunder, but in 2 days we're going up ice fishing, and he's never done it before, and he's going to experience fishing in a state that he's never fished in before. So I like that element of the podcast where it kind of has you reevaluate that professional relationship and turn it into more of a friendship.
From an actual fishing tips perspective, there's been a lot of them thrown out from past podcasts, but the one that stuck the most with me was Eric Harrison talking about using the clear casting bubbles ahead of flies to catch. He used to do it for catching bonito off the West Coast where he grew up in Southern California, brought it out here, and that's become like my favorite way to catch albies is to take the clear casting bubble, fill it with water, and then you can cast a perfect hatch matching fly, whether it's a spearing or an anchovy, and it's a great way to blind cast the albies because the bubble, as Eric said, when you pop it, it creates a big splash that has the same resonance and appearance of a feeding albie going through bait fish school. So any albies in the area see that. I mean, look toward the area, see your fly, and then eat that. So that's been a tip that's added so many more albies to each of my seasons just because once I wouldn't catch blind casting. Yeah. Now I'm, without seeing them feed, now I'm catching them.
And you hope that our listeners out there have gained some of those tips as well too, and have learned some things from this podcast. It's not just entertainment, but hopefully there's also some good tips and tricks that we unearth from our guests in here.
I hate when you fish for albies that way because it always distracts me because I'm always like, oh, breaking fish, and I'm like, no, it's just Jimmy's stupid bubble.
Yeah. People constantly rubbernecking like, there it is. I love doing it in a crowd of boats because you just pop it and you see all of a sudden there's 6 epoxy jigs landing right on your bubble.
That doesn't sound productive.
It's fun on the slow days.
What has been some of your favorite tips or interviews or?
One of the coolest things I think is that we've been able to get some folks in here to tell stories that otherwise might never be told or might get lost. And I think back to Carl Johansson was one of our earliest guests, and he's a local guy who's been fishing the canal for decades, fishing locally for decades, and has a ton of stories, has a really interesting background and upbringing. Growing up in Boston, talked about fishing when he was a kid. Told some stories about fishing for cod from shore in South Boston, and I don't have the details on the tip of my tongue right now, but a local famous wrestler pulling up in a Cadillac.
Was it Killer Kowalski?
I think it was. It was. But really cool to get some guests in here that have stories that they may have never have shared them, and to get it out to a wide audience.
We've had very loose parameters when we just decided to jump into creating a podcast, and literally that has been the only one to be the keeper of the region's stories. And it's kind of been how we've determined like what guests to book, and I think we've kind of done that ring of like science, figuring out how they got their journey, how they got to where they are in marine science, and then the same thing with everything from regular Joes to some of the biggest local names in fishing. So it's been cool to kind of bounce around a little bit.
It's also, one of my favorite things, just backing way out, one of my favorite things about fishing is the fact that it brings together so many people from so many different backgrounds, so many different types of people. We always talk about, our nation today, it's so fragmented and polar, and everyone's coming from different places, divisive.
Yeah.
But fishing really brings together all different types of people. 3 of us are 3 very different guys, but here we are working together and talking fishing. And I think that's something that we celebrate in all on the water media, but definitely also in the podcast. You're getting people together in here talking about fishing, sharing a little bit of their backgrounds, their stories, and there's a lot of commonalities and there's a lot of differences.
I feel like you're talking to me, Kevin. I feel like you're looking at me being like, I would absolutely hate this kid.
I want to see.
I would cross the street if I saw you coming toward me if we didn't both like fishing.
I would love to see how Kevin ranks himself between me and you. Like, I would love to see what's that division, because I feel like he and I are from the same side of the tracks in your mind.
This isn't about side of the tracks or anything like this. Isn't about me being an elite Ivy League educated fly caster. That's not where I was going with this. I'm just saying it's bringing us all together.
I hate it because I genuinely love the kid, but I feel like in return, he's like, if he didn't fish, I'd hate his guts.
Hey, I liked him so much better when he surf fished. You were more fun before you became a fly guy.
Yeah, I got to get back into it. That's something I'm going to do this year. We're going to get back out and surf cast together again. I'm looking forward to that.
I feel like this should be an intervention. Your fly fishing's hurt me in the following ways.
It's I know you're surf casting a lot less these days as you get older, Jimmy. As it gets harder on the body, as you get more and more out of shape, you start to look for other ways. I notice you're taking your kids fishing a lot more. You're doing a lot of like easier fishing.
Are we going to make this a roast? Is that where you want to head with this?
It seems so. That's another thing that I've noticed in 50 episodes of the podcast. It tends to devolve into the hosts being mean to each other, taking digs, which I guess I don't know if that's the podcast or that's just the way things go in this office from all of us working together for so long.
It's the way things go in this office. Some of the ball busting, if you will, is it's always at an epic level in this office. Kevin's one of the sharpest tongue, dark humor, like he'll zing you when you don't even see it coming. Jimmy, it takes a while, but he comes to the table with some really good stuff sometimes. Creative, but slow processor.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things about Jimmy is when you hit him with a zinger and there's that 2 or 3 second delay and he turns his head like a golden retriever and kind of looks at you and he's like, "Oh, wait a minute, that was mean."
The background on that joke is that my wife, who's a psychologist, I made the biggest mistake of my life, and I said, "Yeah, sure, give me an IQ test." And she gave me the IQ test. She said, "You did fine in everything, but you have a below average processing speed."
And then you told us about
as
it.
if to prove it. I came to the office and told everybody, and they haven't let it go forever. We'll be in a meeting. They're like, let's give Jimmy a minute to catch up.
No.
And yet we go back to the milestone of 50-pound striped bass and see who's actually met it.
Yeah.
They do take a super slow retrieve speed, so maybe there's something. They have been on needlefish and bucktails where the slower the better for those type of plugs.
So Jimmy, let's just do it. You want to talk about your 50-pound striped bass?
No, I don't want to talk about my 50-pound
What has been
bass.
the key? I think you've caught, is it 2 50-pounders in your lifetime?
I know what you're doing.
How many 50-pounders have you caught?
I've caught 7.
You've caught 7 50-pound striped bass, all from a boat? Were they, just fill us in, were they Mojo rigs? How did you catch them?
No, umbrella rigs, actually. No, I've caught one from a boat. My biggest ever striped bass I caught from a boat with Captain Robert.
Oh, that's got to suck.
It does not. It does not. What kind of person or fisherman would I be if I could look at that and be disappointed by that?
That was a special fish.
I would love to get Captain Robin here to talk about the way he fishes. And he's got an incredible story, phenomenal. And he is one of the fishiest guys on the coast.
My favorite Jim Fee 50-pounder is tied to your firstborn daughter. This is one of my favorite Jimmy stories because I've been on the wrong side of this with my wife on a million different occasions, but I haven't had the intestinal fortitude to push it quite this bad. Jimmy, you gotta share this story. It's an all-time favorite of mine.
So my wife was 9 months pregnant, and that had really constricted my radius onto where I could fish on a given night. So it was October. The due date for the baby was toward the end of the month. This was I think October. This was October 10th, and she's like, "Don't go past the canal." The canal was my border. Don't go over the canal. Don't go past. I want to say Mashpee. Just in case the baby came. So it was, you have a wife that's that pregnant, and the baby could come at any minute. You need to be able to be home within 20 minutes. So I go to the canal, and I hadn't been catching anything, and I was in a miserable mood anyhow because I'm like, this baby's going to come, I'm never going to fish again, and if I don't catch a big fish now, I'm never going to catch one. You remember how I was then.
Yeah, pretty much every fall you spiral.
Yeah.
So I was spiraling. It was a whole new level of spiraling for me, and I went to a place on the canal where sometime in July, like I'd gone there and saw a piece of structure I liked, just a little boil from a big boulder, and hooked a big fish that broke me off. And I was out of options. All the spots where I usually catch fish didn't have anything. So I said, let me try this place. I went there, and miracle of miracles, I cast out. It was a 2.5 ounce bucktail jig. I was positioned down current of this boil I saw, which was a big rock, cast up, it was probably only 20 feet from shore, cast beyond it with the bucktail and worked it at the same speed as the current, and the fish hit. And what this fish did that the one in July that I broke off was also a big fish, but it turned right. It turned towards shore, got me into the rocks, and broke me off within a few seconds. This fish turned left. And one thing about that is it makes you think of the luck that goes into a big fish that you don't consider. I mean, I don't know whether it was an instinct or just the fish's first reaction, or maybe the way the hook got it, that it turned left instead of right, but this one went left into open water. And the fight was, the head shakes were immense, but I didn't have a good feel for it because it was so far up current. It had to turn and come down current, so I spent a lot of the fight catching up to it. Then, as soon as it settled in down current, I remember it stopped and I couldn't move it. I remember thinking, it wrapped a rock. It's on the bottom. And then I look and I see there's the fin, there's the tail on the surface. And I was like, holy shit. Like, this is a big one. So after a tense fight, it didn't take any big runs. It was more of a lot of stalemates and just kind of inching it in the shore. Got it in, looked at it, and thought, this is probably the biggest fish I've ever caught. I weighed it, which people were doing a lot more of back then, and it was 55 pounds. And it was this was October 10th, and it was the biggest fish I've ever caught from shore to this day. And let it go, and I'm like, it was the first night I had so many more. Now this is fisherman. You're never satisfied.
Yeah.
It's a great Frank Dano quote. He wrote he's known so many fishermen to say, if I catch a 50-pounder, I'll quit smoking. And they catch a 50-pounder and they light a cigarette and then make another cast. I quit smoking, I'll never make another cast. They catch their 50, light a cigarette and make another cast. So I just caught the biggest fish of my life. Really excited. I'm like, I've got 5 more nights of this tide in the dark. I'm going to get another one. So I go back the next night, break off a fish, hook another big fish. That one turns right. The third night, I'm waiting for the tide. It was a 20-minute window of tide. It was the peak tide. And my wife comes downstairs from the bedroom and says, Jim, I think it's time. I feel kind of funny. My stomach's there. And I'm just about to go and throw on the waders and head to the canal. And I look at her and I say, we're still 2 weeks ahead of the due date. I go, it's heartburn. It's heartburn. It takes some Tums. And, we'll talk about this tomorrow. She goes, no, I think I need to go. So I look at the clock. I go, all right, fine, we'll go. We go to the hospital, and the doctor gets there. And oh my God, she will never let me live this down. Doctor's like, we need to get this baby out. We need to get her out right now. So they're like, we're going to induce her and try to induce labor. And why don't you go home and get her clothes? I'm like, how?
Oh no.
Get her clothes and pack. So I go home. And I'm packing, Pam, you've got your go bag when you're that pregnant because you don't know if you have to go to the hospital. You want your change of clothes and all the things that you want when you have the baby. So I go home and grab that. But before, I'm like, Doc, how soon before you think this baby comes? Probably a few hours at this point. Probably a few hours. So I almost did it. I didn't do it. I wish I had. What stopped me, and this is, oh my God, this is equally as embarrassing, is I'm there. I'm looking at my waders and my rod. I know I've got a couple hours before the baby probably comes. I'm like, I need a gut check on this. So I call my mom. I'm like, hey, Mom. Everybody's got an enabler. Every addict has an enabler. And Eileen Fee's been my enabler for fishing my entire life.
Family owned and operated for over 65 years, AFCO represents unparalleled quality. From inventing the roller guide to introducing the world's first pair of true fishing shorts, which is some of the most comfortable shorts you'll ever own, by the way, AFCO not only delivers products proven to perform on the water, but are true leaders of conservation as well. Their pledge to protect and conserve has 10% of your AFCO purchases going directly to supporting conservation initiatives. Beyond their fishing shorts, a couple of my personal favorites are their ultra soft coastal layer hoodie and quarter zip, their line of Reaper hoodies, and their barricade bibs and jackets. Check them out at afco.com.
I was like, hey, Mom, I think I got a couple hours. I just need 20 minutes. She's like, she goes, get to the goddamn hospital with your wife and have your baby. So I did that. The baby came the next morning. 2 nights later, I went out and opened up a hook on a fish at that spot, the last night of that tide, and then that was it. But that was probably the great. With that coming 2 days before my daughter was born, was probably one of the most special fish I've caught. So the most special fish I've caught, I think.
What was that? What number 50 was that? I know it was your biggest at the time.
That was my third. It's still my biggest from the surf. That was the third fish I had over 50.
That's awesome.
The last one I had was in 2023, and there'd been a 5-year gap between them. And so 2023, I had the one from the boat with Rob Radliff, and I hadn't caught one from the surf since 2018. And I'm like, man, like, you don't know, like 50 pound. The reason that's such a good milestone is because it's not an automatic. It's not a given. You fish hard enough for fluke in enough of the right places with enough of the right guys, you're going to get your 10-pound fluke. You go to Nantucket Shoals with Jeff Fiamari enough, you'll get your 10-pounder. You go with Tom Daffin and Kate May enough for Tog, you'll get your 10-pounder, or your 15, or your 20, or your 14 and a half. But a 50-pound striper, even if you go to the best place at the best time of year, there's just not that many 50s, and that's what makes it great. There are guys, surf fishermen, who are legends, better surf fishermen than I could ever dream to be, never cracked 48. You know, that's what makes it the mark. There's a little bit of luck there. You know, let's say the guy who never cracked 48, he hooks that fish, turns right, breaks him off. So that's why, you know, when it took 5 years to catch another one, or 5 years between them, like, I probably caught my last 50 from the surf.
There's something special about that species from the surf, because it's just you. Like, it's all the angler. There's, you know, I mean, I think that the captain of the boat, if you're going to go on someone's boat and you're going to catch a personal best, they deserve as much credit, if not
more
credit than
Rob
the
Radliff
angler.
deserves all the credit for that. I was there. I existed solely to not mess it up.
I mean, well, that's the thing. The angler still has, you know, it's everything on the line, literally. But, you know, it's the captain's expertise that puts that angler in the position to hook that fish to begin with.
I mean, that fish was that 56. We were fishing somewhere. We just landed a couple 30-pounders, and he looked around and goes, I want to try somewhere else. So we left a pile of good fish to another area where there were some boats where we were fishing. There was nobody at the other place. No sign of structure. It was just somewhere there. In the past, he'd encountered some big fish. So we went back there, and then, boom, got that 56. So that was all his work, all his legwork that went into that, his experience. And amazing fish, biggest striped bass I'll probably ever catch. But the 55 I just talked about the week Mara was born, like, that was my experience. Like, I went, I saw a spot I liked that summer, kind of put it away for a time I needed it, and then went back there and got it. Certainly luck involved, but definitely, like, it was my legwork that led to it. That's what I like about it.
That was my point,
surf.
Jim. I think that's like the holy grail of angling is doing something when you're doing it yourself and no one else to blame for your failures or your successes. I think that's what makes surf casting super special.
Surf fishermen, we like to celebrate our suffering a little bit too much sometimes. It is not that hardcore or severe. At its roots, it's kind of a weird thing that you go out in the middle of the night, sometimes in a wetsuit, to catch these fish that you ultimately release. But it is that self-sufficiency and the fact that, you know, it's on you. It's on you to walk the extra mile down the beach or to fish 5 nights of a good tide to find that big fish. That's what I like. And I don't have to worry about, I don't need somebody to take me out on a boat. I don't need anything else. It's all on me.
Kevin, what's the most ridiculous thing that you've seen Jimmy do for fish?
Wow. Pretty much his whole philosophy and the way he looks at surf casting could qualify as ridiculous. But I mean,
what does that mean?
The reason, you know, you said you were talking about a 50. There's luck involved in catching a 50, but the fact that I've caught 0 50s from the surf and you've caught 5.
I know you do this on purpose. 6.
Oh, I'm 6. Okay, I'm sorry. Is it 6? I wasn't sure. You know, it just goes to show, like, there's way more to it than just luck. I think one of your best qualities as a surf caster, the reasons you've been successful, is persistence. It's not the only reason, but you know, and that's what I've seen from you. You will forego incredible amounts of sleep. You will put yourself through ridiculous amounts of discomfort, like literally like skin rashes, fungal things. You will be in a urine-soaked wetsuit multiple nights in a row, come to the office without showering. Like, you'll do it all just to catch these fish.
I like everyone to share in the suffering.
Yeah, not everyone would do that, torture themselves like that. But that's a big part of the reason why you've been able to catch a 50. I think another thing that's impressive, I mean, if I would assume, listening to this, okay, he's caught 6 right? 650s from shore. He must have a honey hole. He must have one spot where he's figured it out. He just goes there and catches them. Have you caught all 650 pounders from the same spot?
No, it's from a few different places.
Have you caught multiple 50s in any one spot?
I have.
This is making him anxious. I can
Yeah,
feel.
I can see the anxiety
feel
in
it.
his
As soon as
face.
you mentioned just spot or location
Yeah.
around a surfcaster,
I think I was genuinely curious if he stumbled into a 50 at all, 6 unique spots, or if there was one that he got a couple of.
Here's the thing:
if you fished every night at the same place where you caught your first 50, and I don't know where that is, but if you fished there every night, you probably would still have only caught 150. One of the reasons you've caught multiple big fish like that is because you move around and fish in more places than anyone I know. And you actually, like you just described Rob Radloff leaving 30 pounders because he had a hunch about somewhere else. I've watched you follow hunches and then absolutely torture yourself the next day because a lot of the times your hunches have led to complete skunkings, fishless nights. You'll go out, that gambler mentality, the mentality that I know Cheech has a lot when it comes to fishing. You always believe that you're making the right call. You're about to go out and your hopes are sky high. And I've watched you follow that hunch and then get those hopes dashed, but you'll do it again the next night. And I think that's a big part of what's led you to these big fish, being willing to keep your hopes up and go out to these new spots, try different places all the time.
It is, and this is a conversation I have with my wife a lot. She's like, "You're so pessimistic about the fishing." I'm like the very act of going night after night shows like that's an act of optimism.
You are pretty pessimistic though, like verbally. Like you're very negative going into it. Like, we're probably not going to catch anything, but let's go. That's like your thing. It's almost like you want to.
That's like a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
It's a bracing for it, but you wouldn't go if you really didn't think you were going to catch fish.
You wouldn't go.
You wouldn't go.
Yeah.
Especially not.
I don't know if I live by that. Sometimes I go do things and I go, there's zero chance that I catch a fish right now, but I'm just going to be fishing, to be out, stuck on stupid for an hour or whatever, and I don't have to think about anything.
No, I always want to catch a fish.
Yeah, of course. But like, you've been in situations where you're like, this is absolutely hopeless.
Oh yeah, no. Usually it's on somebody else's boat, and and they're not listening to reason anymore, and you're at the 5th spot. Yeah, we don't need to elaborate on that. But yes, I did have one time I was on a trip, and it was clear from the get-go we weren't catching anything, and I snagged up. And I kept snagging and losing lures. I was losing lures. And like, you'd retie and then put it out there. And I snagged and broke it off and just didn't tell anybody. And I just drifted a dead line for a while, for like 45 minutes. Until I was like, are we ready to go yet? Because the worst, in that situation, on a horrible day when you know nothing's going to happen, the worst thing that can happen is somebody catches a fish toward the end of the day, and it extends that horrible day on the water by 2 hours, which sounds counterintuitive, but I've never seen it happen where like, oh, we caught one, and then the floodgates open.
Yeah.
That does happen sometimes, but more often it's like, we caught one, now we're going to keep chasing this dragon for the next 3 hours, and nobody's going to touch another fish.
How did you pull off the limp line retrieval at the end without anybody being like, what is this kid doing?
So Joe Cermele was on the boat. It was a media event, and I reeled in, and he goes, "Did you do that? Don't do that."
That's hilarious. Some of those media events can be god awful. Some of them can be epic, but like,
Please bring me.
some of them can be like, all right, there was no thought put into this whatsoever, and we're just like fishing because they were like, oh, it's a bunch of people from the fishing and boating industry. Let's get them out fishing. And that's where they stop their planning process.
Yeah.
It's when it happens around a different event. If there's, say, a boat show or something else, and like, oh, well, everybody's in one place. Let's just get them out on the water. And it doesn't matter the time of year or what the fishing has been. It just, they're kind of slapdash ones. But so many of the media events that we're lucky to go on, I mean, there's a lot of planning and coordination that goes into it. And
Yeah.
they are, I mean, it's opportunities to fish places.
Once in a lifetime type
Yeah,
stuff.
you'd never
Yeah,
otherwise.
it's ridiculous to think we'd complain about it. For the most part, I mean, you have these incredible opportunities where a tackle manufacturer or somebody who makes fishing rods or reels, or someone who sells a boat, they want to show that product off, and so that's what a media event is. They get together, they invite us, they invite maybe some folks from other fishing media, all come together to fish someplace to try out the product. It's led to some incredible opportunities. I've gotten to fish in Costa Rica. I've been able to fish down in the Keys and Key West. But yeah, you do occasionally end up on a trip where your fishing is very clearly work. It is your job for that moment. And
Yeah.
you're just kind of trying to survive.
But on the other side, even when the fishing's good, sometimes you'll get reminded, like, hey, like, you're here to fish some, but don't forget, like, this is a nice fish that Billy Bob caught. Get your camera out and start taking pictures of Billy Bob. Because that is ultimately, you need to come back from these things with media. That's the whole point. You don't just go down there and say,
course.
thanks for the free food and the free fishing, and I'll see you next year. No, you got to come back and actually deliver on that. So I remember my first couple, my first one I ever went on was down in Louisiana. It was inside some pond, Lake Calcasieu, which is a big saltwater lake that's full of puppy red drum and speckled trout. And I was having a great time. And then one of the this was a group of different tackle manufacturers on this one, caught the fish, and like I'm like, oh, they're over there. And he goes, hey, you want to get some pictures of this? I was like, no, we'll get another one. He's like, well, you get some pictures of this. And then oh yeah, right. So you put the rod down, take the pictures, but you have to. It is not just a fishing trip.
Yeah.
It is kind of a work trip, which is champagne problems. I know.
Sure.
I've got to stop, take a couple pictures between catching speckled trout, but that is an important part of the media event thing. So,
What would you say is your favorite media trip you've ever been on?
I'm glad you asked that, Kevin, because think about the media events that come on the water as kind of they go through a filtration system, and so
The tall dogs eat first.
the tall dogs eat first, and I'm kind of a chihuahua when it comes to there. So we've got our
You're a Pleco?
we've got our Great Dane, who's on one right now, okay, down in South Carolina. Then we have God, I want to insult you in a way. What's a dopey big dog?
Oh, I thought you were going to call me like an Italian greyhound, something.
I was going Greyhound. That's where my mind went.
I'll take that.
My mind went right to
I
Greyhound.
like Italian Greyhound for Kevin. So yeah, Italian Greyhound, he's eating next. You, German Shepherd, maybe. I don't know what you are. What are you? Bulldog?
Yeah,
I'll take Bulldog.
Pretty clearly bulldog.
Bulldog. So yeah, Bulldog usually takes it, and then once in a while it comes down to
I haven't
Chihuahua.
been on a lot.
You've been on cooler ones than I have.
Name one.
Keys?
I manufactured that one though. Like I wasn't invited to that one. I just showed up and said, "Hey, this is what I do." Like, maybe a little help. I'll help you. You help me, and it worked out perfectly. That was a great one.
So usually, like they'll come down. Chris, if Chris can do it and it's a really cool one, he usually will take it. Otherwise, it'll go to Kevin. Otherwise, my one big shot, Shimano had one in the Gulf of Mexico this year, and I couldn't make it. I was already going on vacation, so it had plinkoed down to me, and I went and passed it off to Matt Hefner, the assistant editor here, and then they changed the date to a date I could make, and but I'm a good
You're a good
manager.
coworker.
I'm a good coworker, so I didn't take it back, even though I could have, and I will next time if it happens. But,
That seemed like a cool trip. Yeah, I haven't been on one in a while. The last one got blown out.
the weirdest one I was on, we went to a private lake in North Carolina where it was testing freshwater rods and reels, and this was the lake that was stocked with F1 hybrid largemouth bass. So the idea is that hybrid fish have something called hybrid vigor. So the first generation of a hybrid tends to be more aggressive, tends to grow larger, faster. So the F1 hybrid is a hybrid between the northern strain largemouth bass and the Florida strain largemouth bass, the two different strains that we have here on the East Coast. And they think that the world record largemouth bass, the one caught by George Perry in the 1920s in, I think, Georgia, they think that was an F1 hybrid because there is some overlapping of the range of northern strain and Florida strain in Georgia, or I think Alabama, might be Alabama. So this pond is stocked with them, but it had been stocked the previous year, so they were all 3 pounds, and they fed them. So all these fish, the pattern for catching these largemouth bass was you go to the automatic fish feeder and wait for it to fire off these wine cork-sized pellets, and then you just throw your like Senko worm that looked like a fish pellet, and you'd catch the largemouth bass. And I remember it was probably Kevin. He goes, got the chance to go largemouth bass fishing in North Carolina. He already knew. He'd already assessed this
vetted
entire
this
thing. And he goes, big largemouth F1 hybrids. They're going to like chance for a 10-pounder. You
Hybrid
want to get your
bigger,
10-pounder? And he already knew. He knew we were going to be throwing turd-colored Senkos at fish feeders to catch these pets. The coolest part about there was a cool aspect of that trip, and the pond had enormous bluegills. So copper-nosed bluegills, which is a type of sunfish that grows to 2 pounds, maybe 3 pounds, but there were a lot of 1-pounders in there. So even though it was all bass stuff, when you caught enough bass and took enough pictures, you'd be like, hey, can we throw some rooster tails, some little grubs, try to catch some of the bluegills? And that was a really fun aspect of that. It's not catching rooster fish in Costa Rica like Kevin does, but we make it work.
When somebody brings a media trip to you, like on a platter, and says, "Hey, like I got something for you," just politely decline, because it's usually just a fool's errand.
I got that again. I got it last year. I never learn. He goes, Texas.
Slow processor.
Fishing Texas in the winter. I'm like, I'm in. What's happening in Texas? I'm like, I'm in. I don't need to hear anything else. Turns out no fishing at all.
Yeah, the 0 time on the water fishing media trip, that was, you got suckered into that one.
That's a tough one.
Still cool though. You got to go on a vacation and talk about fishing lures. Not a vacation, but you got to travel and learn about fishing lures and meet other famous fishermen and
eat barbecue, I presume.
yeah.
There was. It was a good feed. It was a very good feed.
Next trip is the Bassmaster Classic for me, which is going to be all work, no fishing. Talk to other people that are about to fish the 4 days of their life, but there will be epic barbecue. It's in Arlington this year. Ray Roberts, I believe, and I'm slowly looking forward to working this event and doing what I need to do work-wise because of the opportunity to sample more Texas barbecue that I've never had before. So it's a win.
Cheech, you are the king of taking a trip that is fully work. A boat show in Miami, a boat show in Fort Lauderdale.
That's where I excel.
At taking a trip that's all work and finding a way to wedge a little fishing in there and a lot of barbecue or food usually.
Yeah.
But
Can we talk about the recent one and its and the shockwaves from it?
the Miami boat show.
I was a spectator for this whole thing, but like, I know it's probably like kind of been reverse engineered and you know.
I don't need any politician spin doctor. Just tell me what happened. What you were at the Miami boat
Right.
show. You had the opportunity to go tarpon fishing.
We work the Miami Boat Show every year, and typically that's not one of the shows where we're able to work some fishing in, unless one of two things happen.
So you're not going to hear any of that story Cheech just told because it's utter nonsense.
I think I can sum it up. So
Kevin, what's been your favorite media event that you've been lucky enough to go to?
I feel pretty guilty right now after the way you introduced all of this, that I've taken some of the best media trips. I've had some really incredible trips to Key West, to fish in Key West. I got to go down to Costa Rica and fish Crocodile Bay. I'm lucky. One of the best trips I did, Old Town Kayak did a trip they put together to Puerto Rico, which was right after Hurricane Maria. That was an amazing trip because part of it was kayak fishing, but a lot of it was also touring the island and finding out about recovery from the hurricane.
What's cool about a trip like that is that something you're unlikely to be able to do on your own. Like anybody could book Crocodile Bay and have a similar experience, but unless you have that kind of connection to Old Town Kayaks, to be able to go down there and do that type of trip, that's a really unique experience.
And what was cool, so down in Puerto Rico, they've got these bioluminescent bays, and so there's kayak companies, there's touring companies that'll put you in a kayak and take you out into these bays at night in the dark. You get out there at sunset, you go out there, and there's tons of bioluminescence. It lights up. It's a really cool experience. But if you go with one of these companies that have the kayaks down there, you can't bring a fishing rod. They tell you no fishing. They don't want to deal with that. They're taking you to go and splash
Look at
around
the
and
pretty
see
lights.
bioluminescence. We were with the Old Town kayaks that we had shipped down for this thing. So we brought our Old Town kayaks in there, which meant we can do whatever we want. So we brought fishing gear in there. and this whole lagoon was just filthy with juvenile tarpon and snook. That was amazing. That was very cool.
Sounds awesome. Did you do any night fishing?
Well, I mean, it got dark. There's bioluminescence. The tarpon kept hitting. It was pretty magical.
That sounds pretty awesome.
Though it might not feel like it yet, the saltwater season is coming up fast, which means it's time to reserve your spot at the rail on one of the boats in the Helen H fleet. The trips begin in early April aboard the Starfish, fishing the winter flounder grounds in Cape Cod Bay. By June, the Helen H will be running past Nantucket to the best fluke fishing grounds in the Northeast. If catching a doormat fluke is on your bucket list, these trips offer your best shot at catching a double-digit flatfish. I caught my first 10-pound fluke aboard the Helen H a couple years ago, and that fish wasn't even in the top 3 when it came to deciding who won the pool money. New for 2025, fishermen can enjoy more space at the rail aboard the Angler, which is running 10-hour, open boat, ultra limited trips to Nantucket Shoals. And if you want to fish the canyons, my favorite way to get there has always been aboard a headboat. The Helen H begins running offshore in late summer with 2- and 3-day trips targeting tuna, mahi, and swordfish. A couple years back, I watched Cheech lose his first ever swordfish right at the boat aboard the Helen H, and we'll be back out there this fall looking for redemption. There's plenty of great fishing options with the Helen H fleet this season, but the boats book up fast. So be sure to reserve your trip today at helen-h.com. So we started this podcast talking about milestones, and those fishing milestones, our 50th episode. Any milestones in either your crosshairs for this year? Kevin, I know you've checked off 10-pound fluke. Cheech, you checked off 10-pound tog just already in 2025. Kevin, what's high on your list for this year that you think you've got a shot at doing? Anything in the pike arena?
I'm gonna sound like I'm just full of it, but like I really don't look at that as having these. Yeah, okay, fine, I do. I have specific goals. Really, what I want to do this year is finally get a big striped bass on the fly rod. I've put a lot of flies in front of big striped bass and have not connected, and that's really my goal. And I'm not gonna put a number to it, because really anything over, let's say, now here I put a number to it, anything over 25 pounds, 30 pounds on a fly rod, striped bass, that's what I want to do this year.
Now, is there a specific to that? Like, is there a qualifier if we put you out in the middle of let's say a big blitz with big fish eating bunker, would that do it for you? Or do you want to do it? You have kind of a spot and stalk fishery that you try every spring where you see fish that size.
I really enjoy Buzzards Bay. Has a lot of really cool fishing in the spring most years, where big striped bass come in and they're feeding. They're going. There's herring runs. There's menhaden. There's a lot of shallow areas where they can be. It's you're not sight casting in 2 feet of water, but you're often seeing them cruising not far under the surface. I like to go out alone in the kayak early in the morning and target those fish. That's where I've been failing at this point. Put me on a boat. I mean, put me on a boat, bait and switch. I don't care. Throw out a live bunker, throw out a hookless spook, get the fish fired up, and let me put a fly directly in their mouth. I'll take it any way I can get it at this point.
Cheech, for you, or are you going to rest on your 14.5-pound tog laurels all season?
I think I'm fulfilled, Jim.
That's not true.
No, I don't know. I like everything that I really want to do. It's all stuff that I will have one shot to do it. Plays out at the canyons or something like that. So I think out of the doable stuff, I'd like to catch a 6-pound New England smallmouth. I think that'd be pretty cool.
It's a high bar.
Yeah. Outside of that, my son, I took him ice fishing. He got all pissed off at me that I didn't measure his white perch that he caught, which was a pinfish, especially for a junior. It was a pinfish for an adult. So it turned into this whole thing. So I think I'm going to enjoy putting him on as many junior angler pins as I can get him to come with me for certain trips. We tried white perch the other day, and I forgot my phone at home. I had the tape measure. I had all the float and fly stuff. We caught perch. We had ourselves a nice fried fish sandwich on a pretty windy Saturday, but couldn't document it, so he could submit it for a pin. So I'm 1 for 3 on the poor kid.
In pinfish, that's like a Massachusetts.
It's a Mass Fisheries Award that
okay.
He went down a rabbit hole once. He caught a pin crappie, junior pin crappie, ice fishing, the day that you had joined us, and we were with another one of our friends. But he went down this rabbit hole to like asking all these questions, and I'm like, well, you can get a gold pin, and a gold pin is catching the biggest of that species for the year, either the longest or the heaviest. So
Do they do it for the catch and release?
they do.
So just to back up, Massachusetts has a program. It's a great program where it's their sport fishing awards program, they call it. So if you catch a fish that adheres to a certain minimum size, you submit it to the state, and then they reward you with an actual pin.
Yep.
It's a little bronze pin with a sculpture of the fish on it.
Yep.
And then on the back engraved is the date it was caught, I think, or maybe
The year and the length
then the
of the
size
fish.
of the fish. So you could do it for catch and
the
keep.
weight. Yep.
If you kill a fish and weigh it, or if you measure it, take a picture of it and submit it. It's a really fun thing. It's a chance to collect all these different pins. It's a little
cool.
challenge, and kids love it. The kid in me loves it.
Yeah, exactly.
I've only ever caught 2 pins. I've got a largemouth and a smallmouth pin, but my daughter has a white perch pin, and she's like, I want to get the pickerel one this year.
It makes a fun game out of it where, you kind of, it's like golf. You're competing against yourself in a way, but it's also layered. Like there's a gold pin for the high water mark in that category for the season. And that comes with a plaque as well, as like a little, binder with the certificate in it, which is pretty cool. And it's usually awarded at their award ceremony. There's a different one for saltwater as there is for freshwater, but there's also Angler of the Year and Junior Angler of the Year, and that goes to the guy or girl that catches the most qualifying fish of the year. I don't know if it's the most qualifying, like the most pin fish, if you will, or if it's the most different species that qualify as a pin. So
But several states have programs like this. I know in Virginia they have their citation program, they call it. And if you catch, I remember I submitted one of the red drum I caught on a trip last June for a citation. And that comes, I think it's just a sheet of paper, or maybe it's a little plaque that says you caught a red drum over 50 inches.
Yet another humble brag, Jim.
Yeah, that just had to slip that in there too. You couldn't miss that day, the red drum fishing, but.
I can't wait to see that show. That's going to be coming out at the back end of this season. It's going to be pretty awesome. I haven't, I've gone back and forth with the whole award thing. Like when I had the boat, I used to always gun for the sea bass high water mark, which was really cool. But now it's kind of come full circle. Now that my son's doing it, I'm a little bit more conscious of making sure I have a tape with me. I usually just keep a digital scale, but now I keep the tape with me. And, there's so many that it's like, oh man, I wish I just took 2 seconds to put a tape on that fish and submit it. When you think about ones that you caught that would have accrued pins that you don't have, that you just ended up taking a video or a picture and releasing.
I don't want a dozen white perch pins.
No.
I would like one for each species.
I want one for
once
each
you do it,
species.
you can check that box and say,
Yeah. But the ones that aggravate me are the ones where you've caught several that would have been a pin, but you have 0 pins because you've yet to think about putting it on the tape and submitting it.
And Kevin hates local freshwater fishing. I try to get him out pickerel fishing every year. He always poo-poos it. Pickerel are great fish, Kevin. I don't know why you hate them so much.
I love pickerel fishing. I like fishing with you. I don't know why you always try and turn it into this
Because
awkward.
I'm trying to turn it into an awkward thing. No, I've tried to. I've always suggested we should make some more pickerel videos and pickerel content, and I get emails all the time.
Pickerel are fine.
Shimano is rods and reels for every fishery in the Northeast, whether it's deep dropping the swordfish in the canyons, casting the stripers in the surf, or finessing panfish through the ice. That's about as wide a range of fishing applications as you're going to get. For inshore saltwater applications, the workhorse of the Shimano lineup is the Spheros SW combo. The Spheros SW is built with premium Shimano technologies like Infinity Drive, which increases cranking power and smoothness while fighting fish. The rods range from a 7-foot medium heavy to a 9-foot heavy and fit Spheros SW sizes from 5,000 to 8,000 for a range of lure and bait fishing. From the surf this past season, I used the Ultegra XR 14,000 XSD paired with the Shimano Tierlejo XX surf rod. The Ultegra XR is Shimano's most feature-packed surf reel to date, with the rigid cast spool support to stabilize the spool while casting heavy lures, Infinity Drive to increase winding power under pressure, and X-Protect technology to provide high-level water resistance. The Tierlejo XX is built for casting distance and durability. The 10'6", 1 to 3 ounce model was perfect for punching ava jigs through the wind during a sand eel bite in New Jersey last fall, and it was great for throwing pencil poppers to distant bluefish off the south side of Cape Cod. It's become my go-to combo when casting distance makes the difference in the surf. No matter what you're fishing for in the Northeast, Shimano has a rod and reel for it. To pick out your next setup, visit fish.shimano.com.
I was so desperate to set the hook today. I got in here super early. I got through some stuff, and I was like, it's still real early. I can steal an hour and a half before work. I get out to my truck. I don't have my waders with me. I left them in the garage. So I found my backup pair of waders, like wedged underneath my bench seat in the back, and I raw dogged it. I was breaking ice with just stocking foot booties on my feet, and 22-degree weather, looking for a bite, and I'm just shaking my head at like what an idiot I am right now.
I feel like we're at a turning point this weekend. By the time this podcast hits, we've got 2 more of the major shows that are coming up. The New England Saltwater Fishing Show is this weekend, and the Edison Saltwater Fishing Show, which is the weekend after that. That one's in New Jersey. Both great shows. Great ways to get in, get some tackle, watch some seminars, and get ready for the coming fishing season, which is really just around the corner.
It's
right
breaking.
now.
Measurements, goalposts, milestones. This Rhode Island show is a big one. This season starting. A 50th podcast, I think, is a very special one.
Yeah.
50-pound striper. That's a big milestone. It's the way we measure the passage of time and give our lives meaning.
That was very deep, Kev.
Wow. Ken Burns.
You guys are degenerates. I'm the Ivy League guy. I got to play into the role.
Well, thanks for listening to another On the Water podcast, the 50th one, if that. Appreciate all the support, and can't wait for the next 50.